I've posted on YouTube for over a decade now, and I'm looking back at some of the worst and best things I've done. Hi, so it's the start of a new project today, and I've just taken delivery of the first materials. I've got some structural ply, 18mm, some Meranti, bit of hardwood, some CLS, and some Sapele faced plywood. Now the floor here in the garage runs out towards the door, so I'm happy to lay some bearers here and level them out so that I can work on 2 sheets of ply end to end at the same time.
Some loose biscuits will help to keep these sheets aligned. And screwing a couple of battens through underneath will stop them coming apart.
A third sheet of ply, this one, connected to the other 2 in the same plane, provides a point where I can strike my radiuses from. Then with a bit of simple geometry I can work out the shape I've got to cut my sections of nosing. Now I've cut a couple of sample pieces for the nosing, and I'm just going to step them round to make sure my calculations have been correct.
After cutting a little over length, every piece needs to be flattened and thicknessed. The first mitre is cut. Then by adding a spacer to my stop block, I can flip the piece around and accurately cut the second mitre in the right place. Two shots with the plane and my mitres are perfect.
So I've cut out all my nosing, mitered it, and it fits in a nice curve around the front of the staging. And I've produced my radius cutting jig here for the router. I've got nice tight mitres all the way around the curve. I've transferred the division line on the staging up to the nosing, so just before that piece gets installed I can cut through it so that the staging can be taken apart. So I can bolt my router down onto this plate. The long arm will give me the radius cut I want, and I better cut the nosing and put the groove in for the front board. The next thing to do is to biscuit all the mitre joints for the nosing. Some very simple and temporary jigging ensures accuracy of the biscuit slots.
I shall be using screws to attach the nosing, and I'm drilling counterbore holes so that I can plug them with wooden plugs when the nosing's been attached.
So I waited till the morning and I cut the internal radius. I'll have a sweep up now and then cut the external radius. Let me show you here how I've set up to cut a segment of a circle with a radius of 2.3 meters. For your beam you need something that's going to be stiff horizontally. So I've used this piece of tongue and groove. For my fulcrum I'm using a 6mm piece of steel rod. On this occasion I only needed 5 different radiuses, and I want them for the future as well, so I'm going to store this board when I've finished with it. So I've just drilled through in the correct places for my centre point. I've removed the router's base plate. I've copied the locations for the fixing holes onto a larger piece of ply. That gives me lots of support. It also means I can attach my beam to it. And where the bit's going to go through, I've cut a nice large circular hole with a Forstner bit. My pivot point goes into a hole in my floor. This is obviously my forced floor of ply. On top of that goes a spacer, which is the thickness of the material I'm cutting, and then a spacer which is the thickness of the base of the router. And because my beam's as long as it is, I've also put a little support in the middle of the beam, which is again thickness of the material I'm cutting and the thickness of the base plate for the router. I've completed the inside and outside curves of the nosing, and I've put a round over on the front outside of the nosing. Then, with the help of my wonderful wife Julie, we picked the whole thing up and flipped it over so I can now work on the underside. And that's no mean feat. This thing is 5 metres long, it's over 4 metres from end to end, and it's got 8 mitre joints in it. So the next task now is to put a small round over on the underside front. After that I'll put a groove all the way around to take the curved riser.
I don't have a track saw, so when it comes to cutting the risers, I'm turning the veneer face ply upside down so I don't get any tear out, and I'm using a long straight edge to guide my saw.
I've just placed in a piece of the veneered ply, which is going to be the riser, and it fits quite nicely in that groove, and it's actually bending quite easily into that curve. So I did wonder whether I might need to make some curve cuts on the back of it, but it looks as if it's going to be absolutely fine. The finished staging needs to be supplied in 3 separate pieces for easy manoeuvrability. So now that I've completed all the major work on the nosing, I can cut it through in the 2 places where the separation needs to be. I've used my finest saw so as not to introduce a large gap here, which would throw the look of the curve out. Now I can remove the sections of nosing for some hand sanding and finishing. With the nosing complete, I can now cut away all the excess from the baseboard and then make a copy that's going to be the top subfloor. I just cut straight the way through with a thin bit in the router.
So that the top of the nosing finishes flush with the finished floor, golly, try saying that when you're drunk, I have to create a rebate in the subfloor.
I could have made this framework up first and then applied the panels and cut them to the right curve at the front, but I decided I'd do the panels first and then do the frames, and that seems to have worked quite well so far. So I've prepared a member for the back, full one for the side, and some ribs, and I'm just finishing up now by putting the curved section on the front. The way I do that is to take a square piece of timber, place it on the curve so it overlaps, mark the curve onto the underside of the timber, take it to the bandsaw and cut that out. And then what would appear to be waste, I then stick on the back side to thicken up the section. This is the biggest curve I've had to make, and that's for the centre section. So I had a straight piece in here, mark the curve, cut it off, and I've got some rather large sections glued on the back there, and we've got a nice curve. Next thing I'm going to do is to drill some pilot holes to hold the curves on, temporarily fix them with some undersized screws, put the lid on, drill and screw that down, then I'll flush up all the curves. Then once I'm happy with all the sections, I'll one by one disassemble them and then reassemble with construction adhesive and full-size screws. So I've cut angles at each end so it slides in parallel and meets nicely on the curve, and now I just mark it, in this case with a pen.
Leaving the line allows me to flush it with the top and bottom panels, and attaching the cut-off to the rear beefs it up again. To keep weight down, I'm cutting some holes in the bottom and then rounding over to ease handling.
So after a little hand planing, the curve's lovely, all the panels are nice and square, match up nicely. This is one of those occasions where in the past I've promised myself to buy a compass plane whenever I want to do a curved surface, but it's just happened to fall over the Christmas New Year break, so I haven't been able to get to the shops to buy one. So I've had to do it all with my number 4, but actually it worked out quite well. Now clearly this is all going to get covered over eventually, and I have my Sapele face ply already. It's been I've had it resting just on a little stick to begin to get a little bit of bend in it, which will just help a little bit. I'll just go on there and we'll pull it round. The nosing that I prepared before has obviously a groove in it for the ply. It sits on this little shelf at the front, leaving enough depth at the back for the finished material, and the groove lines up then with the curve that I've planed on the front of these sections. And the ply, this is something different piece of ply but the same thickness. The ply goes into the curved groove on the nosing and follows the curve that I've planed on the bases, and all goes together and produces, I think, quite a nice finish. I don't know if you can tell there, but some of it is quite red and other bits are a little bit darker, a bit greyer. So I want to try and find something that will blend those a little bit nicer than they look at the moment. Also, the risers are going to be Sapele faced, which again is a very slightly different colour. This is far from my speciality, and so it's going to be a case of trying different stains and seeing how I get on. Something I experimented with quite recently on my channel was iron acetate. So I'm just trying a little bit of that on the Sapele, and here I've tried some on the Meranti. We'll leave that for a little while and see how that gets on. Also on the back side of the nosing, where we're not going to see it, I can also try on the difference between the dark and the light. I've got two patches right next to each other here. Let's see what effect that has. Now it's turning out to be a nice colour, but it's not helping here to actually match the two together. But I've also got a number of different stains I can be trying as well. Now it's time to just clean up the nosing, removing any pencil marks that were on it, getting it ready for its finish.
Having completed the 3 structural boxes, the only finish they receive is some matte black paint to the sides that abut the chancel step and each other. The facing ply was then attached using both clamps, brads and also the temporarily fitted nosing. The brads will remain as a permanent mechanical fixing, being tapped below the surface and filled. Temporary feet will protect the skirted edge whilst it's in the workshop, but I need to make some permanent feet later on. In order to hide the screws attaching the nosing, I'm cutting some plugs out of a spare piece of Meranti. I invested in a new HVLP spray system for this build and built myself a small spray booth at the end of the garage. Contrary to popular belief, I still have to buy most of my new tools like anybody else. Laying parquet flooring in a herringbone fashion is really quite simple, unless of course you decide to have a curved edge and 3 separate sections that all have to line up when they're put together. I had to dig out my old scroll saw, as the idea of tackling it all with a coping saw just didn't fill me with that much joy. A little bit of improvisation helps to keep the blocks pressed down whilst the glue goes off. Ordinarily you shouldn't need to do this, but I did find that a couple of the boards were actually very slightly bowed, so I just thought it'd be sensible to weight it down. Hand planing this flush would have been quite a challenge. Because of the herringbone pattern, the grain direction changes wildly every so often. I set up the small gap between the bearing and the cutter to be on the glue line, so you see a little bit of glue is still left there, which I can trim off easily just with a chisel. This saves it getting all clogged up in the cutter. I counterbored all the holes for fixing the nosing on, and now I'm going around plugging them. Pop some glue in the hole. After staining the plugs and some final finishing, I added some permanent feet and it was off to the church. 2 of the sections were a little too large for my car, so thanks Dad for lending me a hand. Thanks also to the organist. I really wasn't expecting that.